Notre Dame fans, welcome to a special surprise edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, and surprising commitment. I can honestly say this is something that rarely happens in recruiting. A kid commits to a school and people really weren't prepared for it, including, according to some conversations I've had today, the Notre Dame staff wasn't necessarily prepared for it, and that would be the commitment of 2022 offensive lineman Emil Wagner to Notre Dame. So this was a kid that for a while was considered to be a lean to Kentucky. There was a period of time where I don't think he was even a take for Notre Dame or Ohio State because of some concerns that we'll get into later. Nothing about him personally or character. All those things check out extremely high. Just more about, his projection to the next level. But he clearly became a take for Notre Dame, which made a lot of sense when they missed out on some other tackles in the class. And the staff got it done. Tommy Rees was involved. Jeff Quinn was very involved in this one. So this is a plus for Jeff Quinn and on the recruiting trail to be able to get Emil Wagner. And so we're going to talk about Emil a little bit. We're going to talk about how this impacts the class. We're going to talk about how his fit, why this was a take for Notre Dame, and then we'll get into him as a player, and we'll watch a little bit of film as we always do. So let's get rocking and rolling. Like I said, this was a bit of a this was a surprise, and we have a question from Tommy Guns in a super chat. He says, like the now Purdue receiver was a few years ago. He's referring to TJ Sheffield, who committed to Notre Dame. They weren't. But the difference is at that time, the receivers coach for Notre Dame, who's still the receivers coach, took the commitment, and there were other people that weren't willing to take it, right? It was a mistake on the receiver coach's part. And the reason, so they kind of dropped him, and this is a little different. They wanted him down the stretch, right? Notre Dame wanted Emil Wagner. They just didn't think they were going to get him. Brandon says, I've heard that intro before. You did not hear it where you just said you heard it, Brandon. You've heard it on our podcast. This is our intro. This is a song that was specifically made for Irish Breakdown. So no, this is not a music that we got from anywhere else. This is our intro. And if anyone else is using it, then you need to let me know because they're stealing our song. But no, this is our music. So just want to make sure that's clear. So back to Emil Wagner, he was a kid that was a take for Notre Dame today. He was a take leading up to this. So it's a different scenario than the TJ Sheffield situation where he was only, he was not a take. That was a poor job by the Notre Dame receivers coach at the time. This was the situation where Notre Dame decided after missing out on Jake Taylor and Zach Rice and some other tackles is, hey, we got to go find a tackle. And Emil made a lot of sense, and we'll get into why that is the case down the road. So let's talk about, sort of how this impacts the Notre Dame recruiting class. Number one, let's look at it from a ranking standpoint. So this jumps Notre Dame up to third on the 2004 ranking. It jumps them up to fourth, or it keeps them at fourth on the Rivals rankings, and they're just like a point behind Texas A&M. So I was able to look at both of those and kind of see. So this is a commitment. Emil Wagner ranks as the number 134 overall player in the country on the composite list. He's ranked number 116 by 247. He's ranked number 116 by ESPN, and he's ranked number 116 by On3 Sports. So this is a high pickup. This is a good pickup. So from a recruiting ranking standpoint, this is a good pickup. And of course, you get another highly ranked offensive lineman. So there's some good perception to it when you look at how this is to be viewed. So I think that part of it is good. Again, look, perception matters. And this is where I think rankings can come into play, is the perception matters. When you're looking at recruiting rankings, perception matters. Players look around. I may not care about rankings. I may not feel they mean a whole lot, but players do. And they all, they'll kind of make comments about they don't care about that stuff, but they do. Which is why you kind of, they do a lot of things they do. So I think that's a positive, right? So from that standpoint, that's a positive when you look at where he's ranked. Let's talk about the need and the fit, and I think this is important too. So coming into this class, Notre Dame needed at least 4 offensive linemen. We had talked early in the year about potentially could get to a fifth if things worked out the right way. And I think based on how you project the roster moving forward, based on how you project the rest of this class filling out, I think Notre Dame is in a situation now where a fifth offensive lineman could be had. And I've reached out to some sources today, and we'll talk about whether or not they can get a fifth offensive lineman. So this gives them 4 at this point in time. But the key was, 4 or 5. The key was you needed 2 tackles. Okay, and you've got Ty Chan, because when you look at the roster, and I've heard people say, well, they've got Blake Fisher and they've got Joe Alt and they've got Tosh Baker. They're good at tackle, and I'm like, well, no, not really, because they still don't have great numbers. Number one, I don't think it's a given that Blake Fisher stays a tackle or that he should stay a tackle. I think Blake can play tackle, but if Tosh Baker gets coached correctly, there's a good chance that Tosh Baker, Joe Walton, Blake Fisher are your 3 best linemen, or 3 of your best linemen. And if that's the case, you're not moving Tosh Baker to guard. At least you shouldn't. And I don't think Joe Walton's a guy that should move to guard. I think Blake Fisher could be an elite, special, top 10 NFL draft pick kind of player guard, like Quentin Nelson was before him. So the point being, it's not necessarily a situation where you look at it and say, okay, you're set at tackle, right? There's a need for depth, and you always need to recruit tackles, because the other thing too is tackles can tend to play at other positions, and tackle is a lot of times where you get some of your best athletes, and that certainly applies to Emil Wagner, which we'll get into. So I felt like they needed 2 tackles, and it was getting to the point where it wasn't looking like they were to get one. And the hope is that if they're able to get Billy Schrauth, maybe he could play tackle. Joey Tanona, Ashton Craig, maybe they could play tackle, but you were kind of hoping that they could play tackle. Those guys more project better for the interior, especially Joey Tanona. So you had Ty Chan, but the second tackle was a bit of a question mark. Well, then along comes Emil Wagner. Now you have your second tackle. So when it comes to recruiting ranking, impact, check for Emil Wagner. When it comes to class impact, check for Emil Wagner. And so I think that's certainly a plus. I think that's certainly a positive when it comes to what this commitment means for Notre Dame. So now let's get into, was this a good take for Notre Dame? I'm going to say yes, it was. And I'll get into why. I have raised a lot of questions about Emil Wagner as a prospect, and we'll get into those here in a second. But here's where Notre Dame is at, okay? I'm going to pick apart aspects of his game here in a minute, because that's what I do. We look at positives and negatives, and I have major question marks about whether or not he can fill out enough to play at the next level. And I've seen people say, look, I trust the strength and conditioning staff. Look, the same strength and conditioning staff that you trust was part of the reason they slow played him for a while. And I don't care how good your strength conditioning staff is. If a kid doesn't have the frame to fill out, he's not going to fill out and maintain his athleticism. He just won't. And so that's just the reality. It has nothing to do with the strength staff. Does a kid have the frame to fill up? And there's legitimate question marks if Emil Wagner has the frame to fill out. However, if he does end up filling out, because here's the concern. Let's just dive into it now, and then we'll get into the positives about Emil Wagner. He is listed at 265. He may be 265. The problem is he has a very narrow, thin athletic frame. I have a friend of mine who's in the scouting business, very, very good evaluator of talent, in my opinion. And he said, if you sent me a picture of Emil Wagner, I would have assumed he was a defensive end, right? I would not have assumed he plays offensive line. And I completely agree with that. He doesn't have that huge frame. And then the bigger concern for me is you look at the lower body, and he's got a very skinny lower body. That concerns me. Where, people compare him to Joe Alt. Joe Alt always had the frame. That was never a question. That's why I loved getting Joe Alt when they got him, and why Irish Breakdown, when we wrote about him, we were high on it. Hey, give me a Joe Alt every year. Maybe that Emil can be that guy, but I have more concerns and question marks, because when I look at the frame of Emil, I don't see the same broad shoulders that I saw with Joe Alt. I don't see the same thick lower body that you saw with Joe Alt. I see a kid that looks more like a power forward or looks more like a tight end than he does an offensive tackle. And that's a legitimate concern. Notre Dame had that concern. Ohio State had that concern, which is why he wasn't a take for a long time for either school. So that's a valid concern. He has got a low floor. He might have the lowest floor of any offensive lineman in this class because of that frame, because he may just never get big enough to truly get there. Now, when I say big enough, anyone can get to 300 pounds. The problem is, and look, here's the reason Aamil is at a low weight right now is because his high school coach said their team runs a lot of conditioning season round. That's nothing to do with what he weighs right now, Brandon. And that's not the point. I don't care if he weighed 240 right now. Joe Walt, when he committed Notre Dame, was like 225 pounds. It's not about the weight. It's about the frame. I don't care about his 265. There was a kid, George Fitzpatrick, who committed Ohio State, who weighs less than Emil Wagner now, but you look at his frame, and it's obvious he has the frame to fill out. That's what we're talking about. It's the frame. Now, anyone can get to 300 pounds. The question is, can he get to 300 pounds and play like a 300-pounder? And that's the concern. And that means if you don't have a natural frame to get to 290 plus, you're going to get to 290, but your body's going to tighten up. You're going to get stiff, and you're going to slow down, because not everybody is meant to be 300 pounds. If Tyler Buckner wanted to be 300 pounds, he could eat nothing but cheeseburgers and pizza and be 300 pounds by senior year, but he's going to be fat and slow and not a very good football player, right? So the point is, to use that hyperbolic example, is just because he can get to 290 plus doesn't mean he can play like a 290-pound guy. And that's the concern. That's the question. And we aren't going to know the answer to that until he gets to Notre Dame and gets some time to develop. Now, the counter argument to that is, yes, he has a low floor, but I would also argue that if he can fill out to be 300 pounds, he has the highest ceiling. And I think that's what Notre Dame is betting on. And I think that's the chance that they're taking. And to me, when I look at Emil Wagner, that is where I think Notre Dame came down on this. And that's why I think this makes sense now that you lost Jake Taylor, you lost some of the other tackles. Do you take a chance on a kid like Emil Wagner, who maybe has a questionable frame, but if you put that to the side, there's a lot to like about him as a prospect as well, which, we'll get into here in a little bit when we pull up the film. I mean, this is an athletic kid. It's an extremely long kid. And I'll be honest, I stereotyped Emil Wagner before the first time that I watched his film, because, and I wrote about this in my class Impact. I look at the weight, 6'6". He was I think 255, 260 at the time. And you see the body, he's really athletic looking. And you say he's going to be a real athletic dude that's not real physical, right? He's going to be a finesse player, and he's in all these kind of things. And then you pop in the film and you're like, okay, this kid gets after it. Like he's a better run blocker right now than he is a pass blocker. And that's something that I like. A lot of times when you get these really athletic kids that need to fill out, they tend to not be real punchy kind of guys, and Emil is a physical kid. Now, again, can the strength project to be 290 plus? That's the question mark. But there's a lot to like about him. And that's what I think the staff is banking on. They're banking on the combination of strength conditioning plus coaching and development will allow him to become a big player. Because to me, when I look at him, I say, hey, this is a kid that he's a boomer bust. He's the epitome of a boomer bust prospect. If he can't fill out, he's going to bust. But if he can fill out, then this is a kid that's going to have a chance to be a really good player. And that's what Notre Dame is banking on. Now, my concern is more practical. The other part of Emil as a prospect is he needs a lot of fundamental work, like a lot of young linemen, but he needs a lot of fundamental work. And I don't necessarily trust that the current coach can get him there. And so to me, I'll feel a lot better about this particular pickup if there's a different guy coaching him down the road. I hate to say it, but that's just the reality. And yes, Jeff Quinn did a great job, with getting Emil Wagner, but I don't know if he's proven that he can coach a guy like this. And I look at Tosh Baker and how just fundamentally unsound Tosh Baker is. Tosh Baker hasn't gotten any better since he was a high school player, because he was a very fundamentally unsound player. Emil Wagner reminds me a lot of that. However, if he can get coached up, and if Matt Balis can do what he needs to do, and if Emil has that lower body frame that we hope that he has, this could turn out to be a really good pickup. And that's That's what Notre Dame is looking for. So let's dive into a little bit of film here and take a peek at Aamil. I'm going to show about a minute worth of senior film, and then we'll watch some junior film, and you'll be able to have some insight onto what he can do. All right, let's get that up here real quick. This is going to be some huddle film, so let's watch a little bit of Emil Wagner. Okay, he is the left tackle, and he is number 59 for Wayne High School and Huber Heights. He's from, it's the Dayton area. Again, you can see the length right there. You can watch him use his hands here. I think this is something I like. He's got strong hands. He's got to get his hands a little tighter. They're out wide. He kind of gets to the side of the guy, but you can see the length there. I mean, just look how fast his hands are as well. You can really see it there. Good length, but you can also see how skinny he is. And that ultimately is my concern. This is him down blocking right here. That's the tight end pushing out. I think that's a kid going to Bama, or is that? I have to go look at the number again. They have a tight end that's going to Alabama. You can watch Emil. Good leg drive. It tends to be a little inconsistent, but good leg drive. You see oversets there a little bit, but he is athletic enough to really adjust, get back inside. Does a really nice job there. This is a good recovery. Now again, he's not recovering like this against a necessarily D1 lineman, but I do like the fact that you see that quick feet. He doesn't cross. He plants, works back inside, and then that's also where you can see his length help him out. He's actually beat initially inside. I mean, he's not able to get a body on this kid, but what he's able to do is he's able to use his length to get hands on. Then his body catches up, and he's able to put that kid on the ground. So I really like that. You see him finish on the ground a lot, and I mean that in a good way. Good pad level in the second level. His space gets a little too narrow, but you see him trying to bend at the knees. I like that. He's a good player. Does a good job staying engaged once he does get on people. There you can see an example of his length there. Look how long his arms are. He doesn't really shoot his hands here like with force, but he still rocks that kid back. And you can tell he seems to have pretty heavy hands, which is something you want to see in an offensive lineman. This is an example of just what I mean when I say he's very raw fundamentally. This is not good technique. It's very slow-footed, not getting out there. And I mean, I don't know why that's even on the highlight tape. Or why that's on the highlight tape. You see the wide base. They try to speed rush him here. He's not really a kid you can speed rush. Not when his technique is right. He gets out of his stance really quick, but you just see the long arm. I mean, this guy almost looks like he's offsides. It kind of is offsides. Emil gets to him like it's no problem because he is a really good athlete. Take a couple more clips here. So that's a little bit of his junior film. Senior film. I'm gonna pull up some of his junior highlights just so you can get a sense of just some of the quickness and some of the different aspects of some of the different positives he brings to the table here as a prospect. But we got to get through these silly commercials before I can bring that up. So just give me, it says about 5 seconds is what it says on the countdown. But I think what you'll see in this highlight film is what I want y'all to look for is I want you to look for a couple things. I want you to see the instances where his feet really come out of a stance well. I want you to look at the length. I want you to look at the overall, the change of direction. I want you to look at the punch. He's got a really nice punch for a bit of an undersized guy. And we're going to pull that up here now. So let's check out some of Emil. You see the leg drive, good finish. You see the power. Those are the things that I like to see. Look at that second level athleticism. You see quick feet, good base, but you see how skinny his legs are there, though? That's the concern. See the nice reach there? I like that. When he keeps his base and he keeps his pads low, he comes off. He's really impressive on the second level. Really like what I see from him there. Good finish. Here's another example. Good base. He's got to learn to explode his hips through contact. You can kind of see he doesn't start as well as he finishes, but once he gets those legs going, and again, he is his like this is an example of good and bad. The good is you can see the power, right? The bad is his base gets narrow, and against a better coached defensive lineman, he's going to get tossed a little bit. You can see the length, you can see the strong hands. He's got really powerful hands. Really like him as a prospect in these regards. It's never been about is he a good player. It's just about you've got to be able to project. Can he be this kind of player at the next level? And that's the question. Again, you see athleticism. He's a really good high school football player, and he's got a lot of things that project really well to the next level. It's just can he fill out? Can he play with the power necessary to be that kind of player? You can see the like I said, you can see the foot quickness, you can see the agility. He's got relatively loose hips for an offensive lineman. He's got quick hands, powerful hands. You can see that first step right there is really good. There's a lot to like. So let's just watch a few more clips here and then we'll dive into more of this. All right. Okay, so that's some film of Emil Wagner. So I think you can see from that film that the sort of the wide gap in how to evaluate him, where he is a challenging player to evaluate. In that there's some things that really concern you as a college football coach. The lack of girth, the lack of frame to get bigger. You know, and again, I don't care as much what he is. He weighs more now than Joe Alt weighed as a senior, I believe. Certainly, what Joe Alt weighed as a junior when he committed to Notre Dame. But it's not about that. It's about can he develop and get that. And I think you see that from that film, as you see that. Um, you see that skinny lower body. You see that he doesn't have that really wide frame on the upper body, and you got to ask yourself, can he fill out? Then there's the other side of it where you see the athleticism, you see the instincts, you see the toughness, you see the length, you see the strong hands, you see the willingness to battle in the run game, all those type of things, and you say, that there's definitely something there. There's definitely something there, and I think that's the tough spot that teams like Notre Dame and Ohio State and Alabama were in, because I believe Alabama offered him as well. I'm going to look that up as we're talking here. I believe he did have that offer as well. But when you look at him, you say, boy, there's some things that you really are intrigued by. And Alabama did not offer him. He also had offers from Michigan, Nebraska, Ohio State, Oregon, Stanford, Tennessee. Alabama got one of his teammates, the tight end. So that's when I look at it and I say, boy, this is a tough situation to be in. And I think early on he was not a take for me, because you had the Jake Taylors and you had the Zach Rices and other players at tackle that really had higher floors. And I think that's the rub, is the floor's not real high. But when you look at ceiling, I think that's what makes this an intriguing pickup. The fact that he's going to impact you that way from a recruiting standpoint, because he is a highly ranked recruit. And then you look at the ceiling and you got to say, okay, is the boom, the potential boom, this is what you have to ask yourself anytime you're taking a player that's a boomer bust. And that's what Emil Wagner is. He's a boomer bust prospect. You have to ask yourself, is the boom high enough to risk the bust? And when there was other players on the board early on, I don't know if he necessarily was. As you get into it, you watch his senior film, he didn't really fill out a ton, but you see the strength, you see the pop, you see those type of things, and you say, you know what, there's something there to work with. And I think that's the position that Notre Dame found themselves in. Is Emil Wagner better than taking the risk for someone next year, not taking someone in this class? And I think the staff decided with their current needs that it was worth the risk. And I understand it. And actually I don't have a problem with it. Now here's the concern. And here was my first thought, and I'm going to tell you all what I've been able to find out. My first thought was, as I've been told over and over again that numbers are tight, numbers are tight, numbers are tight, and that they got to be real smart with who they take the rest of this class. So when I saw this commitment happen today, and again, this is not something I was expecting. I can't tell you the last time I had a kid commit that I didn't have like multiple stories written on, and I didn't know this one was coming. I didn't even watch his announcement, to be completely honest with you. I was actually on the phone trying to make some calls, for some business calls for something that we're going to do next week on our show, which I'm really excited about. So I got a couple text messages saying, "Hey, Wagner just picked Notre Dame." I had no clue what was going to happen. So I'm just being honest with you. And from what I'm told, Notre Dame didn't feel like they didn't think they were going to get him either until like right around the time of the commitment. So my first thought was, okay, what does this mean about Billy Schrauth? So that was the first thing I called and the first questions that I was asking my sources. From what I'm told, they definitely still have room for Billy Schrauth. They definitely plan on taking Billy Schrauth if he wants to come. And the vibes about whether or not where they stand with him are still just as good as they were a couple weeks ago. So that was a good sign, because that's the thing for me is if you can see what this class is missing right now in the offensive line class. It is a good offensive line class. This is a top 10 offensive line class right now. You've got Ty Chan, who's a top 200 player. You've got Emil Wagner, who's a top 200 player. You got Joey Tonona, who's a top 200 player, and a kid like Ashton Craig, who I like. He's got a really good ceiling. But you've got a lot of good players and not a lot of great players. Now, that's okay, because I've argued before, if you have 5 good offensive linemen, you can have a great offensive line. So it is a good offensive line class now that Emil's in it, because you needed another tackle. It's not a great offensive line class. If they're able to add Billy Schrauth and Aamil Wagner to this class, now all of a sudden, to me, it's a for sure top 5 offensive line class, because Billy Schrauth would give you what you don't have, which is that top level, top 100 caliber prospect, because Billy Schrauth would be the best offensive lineman in this class. I like Billy Schrauth a lot. And I grade Billy Schrauth out higher than I graded Rocco Spindler, just for context purposes. So he is one of the best interior prospects that Notre Dame has signed in the last 5 or 6 years, in my opinion. That's how good Billy Schrauth is. So if you're able to add that high level talent, and then you have depth, because the thing that I criticized last year's offensive line class for, so the 2020 offensive line class had no depth. You had 2 guys. That's it. No depth. Last year's offensive line class had 5 players, but you had Rocco and Blake, who you liked. You had Joe Alt, who was a bit of a project, grew up faster than we thought. And then you had Pat Coogan, who's just, no. And then Caleb Johnson, who's, a nice player. But, the bottom of that wasn't near as strong as what you expected Notre Dame. If they're able to get Billy Schrauth. And again, I feel good about that right now. But, and Wagner, then you look at, now you're talking about like Ashton Craig being your 5th lineman. Potentially, you could say that maybe Emil Wagner's your 5th lineman because of the boom or bustness aspect of it. Now all of a sudden, when your 5th guy is a guy like Ashton Craig, it really, really adds a lot to the class and starts getting you excited about, okay, they're finally getting O-line recruiting back on track, right? After a couple down years when it comes to putting together the type of depth and talent that you need at a place like Notre Dame. So now you have to then, okay, go get Billy Schrauth, because if you're able to add him to what they're doing now, it's gonna be impressive. And kudos to Tommy Rees for being able to be a driving force behind putting this class together. Kudos to Jeff Quinn for stepping up his recruiting after some bad recruiting at times in the past, and also just flat out getting beat on some better players. Because that's the argument we can have, and we'll have that around signing day is, yes, it's a good class, but it could have been better, should have been better, that kind of thing. So, but at the end of the day, I've always said you evaluate it on at the very end, your final analysis needs to be on grading it for what it is, not what it could have been, should have been. Those conversations you have, we definitely will have those. But when you look at what it is, you just added a tall, long, athletic kid whose compete level is very high. That's the thing I really like about Emil Wagner. He's got a really good compete level. He's going to battle. You've got Ty Chan, Joey Tenona, Ashton Craig. It's a good offensive line class now. If you can add Billy Schrouth to the end of it, it's going to make it a really excellent, not truly elite, because elite, you need a couple, elite guys in it. You need a Kramer and an Eichenberg. You need a Bars and a Nelson kind of thing in a class. That's to me what makes it elite, but it's really good. And as I've said before, 5 good players can make an elite offensive line. And that's what they would need if they were to get to that point in time. So that's my analysis of Emil Wagner's commitment to Notre Dame. That we talked about his rankings. We talked a little bit about the backstory, the impact that it has in the class, and a little bit of what's next. So before I go, I want to dive into some questions here and just see what you guys have to say about it, and we'll get into it. So Tommy Gunn says, I'm about as excited for this one as I was for Walker. I would say that I would have a different tune if I were you, Tommy. I understand where you're coming from, but I think there's enough of an upside here. I don't view him as an Amorian Walker. Amorian Walker can end up being a good player, but I don't see it. With Emil, it's not about a lack of talent. It's about, can he fill out his frame? Completely different kind of dynamic, just in my opinion. So that's certainly something that I feel it's just different than Amorian Walker. I like Emil Wagner. He's a good football player. John Long says, just watch some film on him. I noticed 2 things. His stance looks awkward, and he really kept his feet moving after contact. I think those are both very good observations, John. I think number one, his stance is awkward and it's inconsistent. Like, you'll see sometimes he got this really wide stance, and then sometimes when he comes out of his stance, his base is like too wide. Sometimes he narrows his feet. He's got a very inconsistent playing style because he's a raw young offensive lineman that needs to get coached up a lot better, as he gets older. And that's why, I feel like we need to have a discussion about, who's coaching this kid up. But there's some tools to work with. And the compete level that I've talked about plays part of that is what you referred to is, really pushing his feet through contact. As he learns to step and strike and really get his whole core and everything into blocking, you'll see him play with even more power. But right now, you just look at the hand punch. He's a strong kid for his size, and that certainly has something to work with. Let's get down to some. Jonathan O'Kemmis says, why did he commit now? He was always planning on committing at this time. I think I'm curious to kind of find out when he made the decision to kind of pick Notre Dame. I think it was a late decision. And whatever Notre Dame's pitch was late, they got him to flip it. He was always going to commit around this time. I think the key was Notre Dame was able to get him to pick them, not Kentucky, which is what a lot of people thought. Let's get to some more here. John Long says this can't keep getting alt type guys because a lot of people talking about Joe Alt. Hope they pan out. They're the exception, not the rule. I would agree to that to a degree, John. You can't always get projects, but I have said in the past, I'll take a Joe Alt every year because I don't think if you get 5 guys, the 4th or 5th guy doesn't always have to be a top 100 player ready to go play right now. Give me a high ceiling guy that just needs some time. And then as we found out, the Joe Alt was ready he was ready much sooner than we expected. To your point about him being the exception, though, is if Emil Wagner's dad was a former Big Ten and NFL offensive lineman, I would probably be more prone to take him because I'd have more confidence in the genes being able to saying, hey, look, his dad, because Joe Alt's dad was in a similar path. He went to college as a tight end, grew into an offensive lineman, was was a really good college offensive lineman from what I've read, and then played in the NFL for a number of years. And so you kind of can look at that and say, okay, you look at Joe's frame and you can see the similar things and you can feel like he's gonna grow. We don't have that with Emil, as far as I know. So yes, Joe Alts tend to be the exception, but I'm okay taking a Joe Alt a year. I think in this class they kind of took two guys like that need to fill out and develop and those type of things. But I'm okay because the ceiling is there. And now if you're banking on Emil being your best guy, then that might be a little risky. But they're not necessarily doing that. They've got a couple other really good players in that class. And Jonathan Hill Kimmon says Wagner plays basketball. I'm sure he'll fill out quickly under our strength program. Again, it's not that simple. You have to be able to look at a guy's frame. I'll give you an example. Okay. I remember when Kyle Rudolph was coming out of high school and he was part of the 2008 class. And there was a lot of questions about, could he fill out? Because he was like 220 pounds coming out of high school. Because as you'll remember, Kyle was a really good basketball player. And I believe he played AAU ball as well. But I remember when I first saw Kyle in person, yes, he was skinny, but he had broad shoulders. He had big hands, big feet. You could just see him and say, that's a kid that once he stops playing basketball is going to fill out. When I see, now again, I've never met Emil Wagner in person, right? So keep that in mind. But when I look at photos of him and I see him next to other prospects who I know their size, I don't see that same kind of frame. So it is a bit riskier. But I do think it's worth the risk at this point in time because, again, the upside is there. The upside is definitely there for Emil. And I've never interviewed the kid. I've read a couple updates on him, and I've talked to some people that know him, and it sounds like he is a first-class kid who's going to work hard. That's not a question, it sounds like. And so I think that is also something to figure out as well. Tommy Gunn says, hopefully quicker than Tosh. Again, this is why technique matters. Okay. I think a lot of you fall into this trap of what you see is what the kid is. And that's not always the case. If a kid who's 6'8" isn't coached well, he's not going to look quick because his footwork is going to be slow. Tosh Baker is quick. He just has to be coached properly to be quick. And the same thing is going to be true of Emil. There's times on film where you're looking like that kid's got slow feet. And then there's other times on film and you're like, boy, that kid's really athletic and that kid's really quick off the ball. Why the difference? It's technique. Let's get down here to some more questions. JD Macy says it wasn't committable, talking about the offer to Emil Wagner, until he went on campus and met with Matt Bayless. Once he gave the okay, Notre Dame will take the commitment of Wagner. That's not quite how it played out, because otherwise they'd have taken him back in June when he officially visited. That was when the concerns about him arose, was out of that visit. Now he visited again this summer, but again, I don't think this isn't how it played out. As far as I know, and this is what I was told at the time, that there were concerns during his visit about whether or not he would fill out. There still are concerns about that. I don't think his concerns about that have been eliminated. I think it came down to looking at your roster and saying, okay, do we have room to make it work? That's the first thing. And Notre Dame staff decided they did. Okay, do we have enough on our depth chart to be able to take a chance on a kid that could end up busting? And when you look at Joe Alt and how quickly he's panned out, when you look at Caleb Johnson and Blake Fisher in the freshman class, you look at Ty Chan's really developed. So Ty Chan was also a boomer bust guy. Now Ty Chan's up to 300 pounds and he looks pretty good. So you feel a little better about him. Joey Tanona is a high floor guy, and maybe not the ceiling of other guys, but a high floor guy. So I think Notre Dame looked at the overall roster and said, hey, we have room for him, and we're in a situation where we can be patient with him to develop. We don't need him to develop right away. I think that's how Notre Dame looks at it. So I think it was more that than it was Matt Bayless steps in the room and says, take the kid, and they take the kid, because if that were true, Notre Dame would have taken Emil this summer. Because coming out of his visit, if Notre Dame would have pushed for him coming out of that visit in June, he would have committed Notre Dame a while ago. And that's just how it was explained to me at the time. It's how it's explained to me now. So I don't think it's quite that case, and that doesn't make it a bad thing. Again, you have to be willing to weigh, is the risk worth the reward? And I think in this instance, Notre Dame decided that it was, partly because of need, but also partly because the tools are there in some very important areas. And then you hope that the other areas become better as well. Got a super chat down here from Tommy Guns. Brian, I meant hopefully he develops his technique quicker than Tosh. Good save. Very good save, Tommy. Nice comeback on that. I appreciate that. Appreciate the super chat very, very much. Let's get down to some more questions here because I want to get your guys' thoughts and questions. John Climax says, regardless, 6'6" and 265, 2 years on the plan, and he will be 300. Again, anyone can be 300. It's about whether or not he can be a good 300 and maintain his athleticism. And it doesn't have to be 300. Robert Hainsey was never 300 pounds. Robert Hainsey was between 290 and 295 his whole career. It's about, can you play strong and can you play big? And is it good weight? I mean, Robert Hainsey's 290, 295 was just him having good weight. If Emil can get to 290, 295 and it's good weight and it's legit weight, meaning good weight doesn't just mean not being fat. It just means, look, it's like Mike Golick was 300 pounds in Notre Dame, right? Mike Golick Jr. was 300 pounds. But when you watched him play, he didn't throw people around like a 300-pounder. He added weight on to be 300 pounds, but he didn't play like a 300-pounder. He was a technician and all that kind of stuff. And so to me, it's, can he get to that size? Can he get to that size and maintain his athleticism? Can he get to that size and still have the strength? Can he move? Can his conditioning level? Because the other thing too is you can put on the weight and it doesn't mean you're going to keep it on. I'll give you an example. When I played in college, I had a bad offensive line. So I was like, I need to fill out and I need to put on weight. I came into my junior season like 205 pounds. It wasn't good weight and I wasn't carrying it well, but just because of the nature of camp and my natural body, I lost the weight and I losing like 20 pounds during the season. Myron Tungavaloa is a very similar situation too. If you want to talk more relevant, talk more Notre Dame. He was a guy that was listed at like 285, 290. I was told at times in the last 2 years, he struggled to stay above 260 because once you get into the season and you're not, carbo loading and doing all the things you do in the offseason to get ready for a season, it can be hard to keep that weight on. And that's the concern about Emil. Not that he can get up to 300 pounds. I'm sure he'll be close to 300 pounds by the time he enrolls in Notre Dame next year. I'm sure he'll be close to 300 pounds, if not 300 pounds, every summer on the weight chart. Will he still be there by the time you get to November? That's the question. And can he play at that weight? And can he play like someone at that weight? I think those are bigger question marks that have a lot more to do with his success than just being 300 pounds. And that is the difference, in my opinion. Kenny Moore says, yeah, I don't get the negativity on this one. Wagner is a very good prospect. Only issue with him is weight and how much he can add without robbing him of that elite athleticism. See, that's the thing, though, Kenny, is you're kind of just throwing that last part out there like it's no big deal. That's a pretty big deal. And I think that's where some of the negativity comes from. But I think that the first part of what you're saying is correct. If the second ends up being okay, then the first part of your statement is true. He'll be a very good player, and that's where you get that boom or bust thing, and that's what Notre Dame is talking about. But I think at the point that I'm making is you have to be careful taking this kind of risk. Notre Dame is in a position now where I think they can take this kind of risk, and with where they are with this class, plus where they are with next year's class, with the current roster coming back, I feel like they feel they have the room to do it without sacrificing another player. And that's the key for me. You don't have to sacrifice Billy Schrauth to take this commitment. And that's a big thing for me. And Kenny, you said it again, his ceiling is immense. Again, the only issue with Wagner is the weight. But again, we're talking about an offensive lineman, not a receiver. Hey, you know what? I wish Devontae Smith was a little bigger and stronger, but you know what? He can still be great at that weight. This is an offensive lineman. It's a little different situation. So again, I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying about his upside at all. But I think there are some people that are looking at the question marks and just dismissing him as a prospect. I think that's wrong. I think there are also some people that are looking at his upside and just dismissing the concern. And I think that's also wrong. I think we have to look at this objectively and say, There's a lot to like about this kid, a lot to like. And we've talked about that going back over the summer. But the reason I didn't want him over the summer, and the reason Notre Dame didn't want him over the summer, and the reason Ohio State didn't want him over the summer is because of the weight thing. If that wasn't that big of a deal, Notre Dame would have taken him a long time ago. And so I think that's the issue that people have to accept, that he is a boomer bust guy. The question is, do you take a chance on that? And as I've said all along, if you're going to err on the side of upside, Kenny, and I think that's something you and I agree on, is if you're going to take a chance on a kid that's big and strong, but okay, perfect example. Okay. You're talking about this kid being a top 150 player. Well, there's another offensive lineman that Notre Dame did want, that Joe Bruner from Wisconsin, 6'6", 305, big, strong kid, really good high school football player, top 100 recruit. If I had to choose between the two, I'd probably take Emil Wagner, because with Emil, the ceiling is higher. With Joe Bruner, it's kind of like he's going to have to probably move to guard. He's not real athletic. I don't know how much better he's going to get. I saw a higher floor, but I didn't see the ceiling of a top 100 recruit. So, but if you were to take Joe Bruner, I'd say there's more certainty that Joe Bruner is going to play at Notre Dame than there is Emil Wagner. The flip side is, and this is where I would say, if you can only have one of the two, why you'd want to go with Emil is, yeah, maybe Joe's more certain, but you don't win championships by taking, always taking the safe player. Sometimes you got to take that chance and go for the guy with the higher ceiling. In this instance, I think Emil has a higher ceiling. Now, Notre Dame wanted Joe Bruner over Emil, and that's fine. They wanted Zach Rice over Emil. That's fine. Sometimes I think you can end up getting the better player, even though you didn't feel that he was the better player. And that's why I feel like rankings wise, if Joe Bruner was in the class right now, it'd be better for Notre Dame. But from practical standpoint of who I think is going to be the better player, I think Emil is the guy I would have taken, because the potential for the ceiling is so much higher. All righty. Tim Sully says, I'm guessing none of us saw this coming, or it would have been mentioned at the 12:30 podcast. Go Irish. Yeah, I didn't see this coming, Tim. I mean, I'm not going to be like, yeah, I knew, but I didn't want to say anything to you about it. No, I had no clue this was going to happen. I was in the middle of doing something else when he committed. I had no clue it was going to happen. So I had to put together two real quick articles to get that done. Get down a few more of these. Tom Chris 2488 says, I see this as a good pickup. He doesn't have to start right away because you have Alt and Fisher for the next few years. We'll give him time to put on some weight. That is correct. Mike Gardner says, I have faith in Notre Dame's strength conditioning program, not so much for O-line coaching. Weight won't end up being an issue, I hope. I think that last part is very fair. Get some more. Here's an interesting story. So he is not to mention from an Ohio State stronghold at Hugh Bright's Wayne. He had a teammate who's a junior, Josh Padilla, committed to Ohio State a week or two ago. I think a week ago. So there's another player on that offense that is committed to Alabama. He's a tight end that's committed to Alabama. Notre Dame was actually recruiting him as a defensive end. That's going there. So that's a good school. And it's also where Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens went. Okay, let's get to some more here. A few more. Cal, this is a good observation. He reminds me of a basketball build. I agree with you, Cal, and that's part of my concern. That's part of my concern. Okay, let's get down to some more here as we get through this. Kenny Moore, he is still worth the gamble. I think at the end of the day, that's the decision that Notre Dame needed to make, Kenny, is they needed to decide based on everything that's transpired in this class, based on where our current roster is, based on where we are with 2023 recruits, all those type of things. I think it comes down to, is it worth the gamble? And I think Notre Dame decided it is. And at this point in time, as long as it's not taking another prospect, and what I'm told, it's not taking another spot from somebody else, this is probably a spot that's kind of there because of the current roster. I'm good with it. I am. I'm good with it. As long as, again, I'll feel a lot better if I knew he was going to be coached by somebody else. I would feel even better about it at this point in time. D-Rock says, has Aamil played other positions before? I believe he's played some defense, but this isn't a kid this isn't Jerry Tillery. And I saw a couple people kind of make that comparison. He has the body of a defensive end. I don't think he has the athleticism of a defensive end. Now, maybe you could put him inside at some point in time down the line, but the few snaps of defensive line that I've seen aren't like, ooh, this kid could maybe be a two-way player. I just haven't seen that from him. So that's and Maysay K says 12 and 13 personnel will take on a new meaning when Wagner's on the field. Now, that is an interesting thing because if Notre Dame does want to go to sort of a big personnel with more of an athletic body, sort of like they use with Joe Alt this year, that is an area that maybe by his second or third year that Aamil can definitely, second year that Aamil could definitely do. Christopher Sally asks, how does his frame compare with Alt? And I mentioned this earlier, Christopher. Alt was always bigger. He was broader. He had thicker lower body. He had a frame. I never questioned, I barely questioned whether or not Joe Alt would fill out. The question with Joe Alt was how quickly would he fill out, and he filled out a lot faster than I expected. Hopefully, Aamil does the same thing. That's the hope, right? The hope is that the people that say, well, once he stops playing basketball, I think the hope we should all have is that side of that argument is correct, that once he stops playing basketball and once he gets into the Notre Dame nutrition program and, hey, here's how many calories you need to eat a day, here's the type of food you need to eat, those type of things, that all of a sudden it'll be better. And if that happens, then you're going to be in good position. You're going to be in a position where he's going to fill out and then the athleticism starts to take off and all those type of things. So I think that's the difference. I don't see that as naturally as I saw it with Joe Alt, and that's where my concern comes from. Daniel Wade asked that same question. What about Wagner as a football player? Maybe using him somewhere else on the offense? No, maybe as like that 13 personnel power formation, goal line, red zone type of thing. Sure, but that would be it. It wouldn't be like Alt. Like when you played Alt at tight end. Joe caught passes in high school. He wasn't just some big blocking tight end. He actually, seen him run corner routes in high school and catch the ball. He was a different type of athlete and different type of prospect than Emil Wagner. Okay, let's get down here to some more as we wrap up. Roshaman 18, any news on Shrouth? I shared a little bit of this earlier, just in case you didn't hear it. Wagner still has a spot. This does not affect Shrouth, at all. He still has a spot. I still feel good about where things stand with Billy Shrouth. I don't know what he's waiting for. I don't know what his decision process is or anything like that. I haven't been told anything new, but with how his recruitment has gone, I'm always prepared for something to change. It's just the latest I've heard is that Notre Dame still feels good about where things stand with him. And the big news for me today was when I was told that this doesn't impact Billy's spot at all. Ryan Weichel says this. I like this. He reminds me of Tyron Smith of Dallas Cowboys. He played at USC. Man, look at his high school picks, almost the same body. I would say very athletic, similar athletic frame, Ryan, I agree with. But the thing is Tyron was always thicker in the lower body. Like their upper bodies look similar. I think Tyron was a little wider, not by a ton, but a little wider. But Tyron had a much thicker lower half. But if that's end up, I think athletically they're similar, lengthwise they're similar, punch they're similar. But I think Tyron was more of a certainty to me because he had a little thicker frame and a little thicker lower half, especially. And I think that's the important one. Jay Wiki Jr. says, do you think if they get Shrouth, this saves Quinn for now? What I mean, obviously the O-line recruiting has been questionable in previous years. Do you trust Quinn to coach a class of top recruits? No, I don't. Do I think it's going to save him? Yes. I've been skeptical about the Jeff Quinn not coming back stuff for a while. the fact that they're beating up on a bunch of bad teams down the stretch and running the ball and, getting good recruits now, I think those are going to be the excuses Brian Kelly needs to hang on to Jeff Quinn. So I'm not optimistic that they're going to have a new offensive line coach. Tyler Reese says the same thing. Tyler says, what are the chances we get a different O-line coach next year? I'm not optimistic. I'm just not. So it is what it is. But the good news is he'll have some talented players to work with. George Lee Washington, Marcus Freeman, 2025. I hope it didn't take that long. Tommy, I think this is where a lot of your stuff is coming from, because you see a raw kid that's going to need a lot of work, and you see how much a kid like Tosh Baker's been wasted so far under that. And I think you're kind of taking some of your frustration out there, knowing you like I do. I think you're taking some of your frustration out on Quinn, out on Wagner as a prospect. And I think if you just look at this, take a step back of who the coach is and all that stuff, and just look at him as a prospect, I think you'll see some things to be concerned about. Frame, being able to fill out that kind of thing. But I think you also see some things you really like. If you can look at the film, just with more of a clear mind and a clear eye, I think you'll see, boy, there's a lot to like about this kid. Is he going to pan out? I don't know. Is he going to fill out? We don't know. But sometimes you got to be willing to take those chances. Not every kid is going to be a surefire thing. I don't think Notre Dame signed Joe Alt thinking, hey, we're going to be able to start him as a freshman and he's going to be 300 pounds. I think Notre Dame thought the same thing that I thought, which is eventually he's going to get there and eventually he's going to be good enough to play. And kid ends up being better than you thought, or is better sooner than you thought. And I think that's kind of where this one is. I think if you can try to look at it with a more open mind, I think you'll like this kid more, in my opinion. Michael says, great news, Brian. I didn't see this coming. Me neither, buddy. Can you please give me some realistic expectations for the remainder of the 2022 class and possible new names emerging? Thanks. I don't know about new names, but I think that my realistic finish is that they get Xavier Nwankpa and Billy Schrauth. That, to me, is the realistic finish. I don't think they're going to get any of the linemen, defensive linemen, which I'm a little bummed about, but I just think right now that's not where they're trending. Could that change? Sure. But right now, I can only speak to where things are right now. But that's how, if I were to make a prediction today, I would predict that they finish with Xavier Nwankpa and Billy Schrauth. And then now that's a 24-man class that's going to finish in the top 5, because your last 3 pickups would be all highly ranked kids, which is certainly a positive for Notre Dame. JP Buellsfeld says, I will be at the Hayes at Mays, Kansas high school football playoff game, which is 20 minutes from my home, tomorrow night. What is the possibility that Avery Johnson will be a Notre Dame QB one day? It's possible. I mean, I don't know if I'd be willing to put odds on it. I think Dante Moore is still the guy that they want. There's some new kids on the board. They like Jackson Arnold from Texas. They like the kid from Alabama they recently offered. They like Avery Johnson a lot as well. I don't know if I'm comfortable enough with where they are in the rankings to say, good chance. But I think if Notre Dame keeps recruiting Avery and they decide that they want to make a play for him and like say, hey, look, we're ready for you to commit, I think they'd have a pretty good shot of getting him. I just don't know if they'll get to that point or not yet. But he's definitely worth watching, because he's a talented kid. He needs a lot of work. It's pretty raw still. When I say raw, what I'm always referring to is usually it's about the technique, the road he has to become a fundamentally sound football player. A kid like Avery Johnson's just getting by right now and just God-given ability. Jonathan Garbick says Rivals in 247 had a 100% to Kentucky crystal ball. And then, of course, it's the future cast for Rivals for this kid. It's nice seeing Notre Dame keep pulling kids from the SEC pipelines. Don't disagree. Adam Kipker's fired up. He says, I've been saying this for the last year and a half. Notre Dame 2 national championships in the next 5 years. That would certainly be a lot of fun. A whole lot of fun. Brian Denbo says, getting here late. How valid is the 4-star? Legit. I will rewatch if already answered. Thanks, Brian. I have not answered that part. He earned a 4-star grade from me just because of the athleticism and the power and the run game ability. He's a borderline 4-star for me. I don't have him as a top 150 player. I have him more as a top 250, to 300 kind of guy, because I grade differently. I because of my upside grade, I can look at it differently. I have him with the 5-star upside grade because The tools are there. I just have less certainty that he's going to get to that. His ceiling, the only other guy that I have, I believe I have Ty Chan with a 5-star upside grade, but he may not even be a 5-star upside guy. If you just give me a second, I can look at that. But yeah, I Tanona, I don't have as a no, I don't have Ty Chan as a 5-star upside guy. So Aamil would be the only one with that 5-star upside in his class. And again, that 4.5 stars, top 50 players. I don't hand out a lot of 5-star upside grades, and I definitely don't hand out a lot of 5-star grades. Although, if you go to irishbreakdown.com, I released my evaluations and rankings for the 2023 commits. I do have a 5-star in there, and it's not Drake Bowen. Drake Bowen is not my number one commit for the 2023 class. So check that out. It's at irishbreakdown.com. Let me see here. All right, here we go. Cesar says, hello, Brian. Good to listen to the live show from Southern Cal. Let's hope this player can develop and to contribute to the team to be stronger, Notre Dame more competitive. I agree, Cesar. I appreciate you being a part of the show. RJG Irving, do you see a player comp he could develop into? Let me think about that one, because there's not really a Notre Dame guy that I would think of. I'll be honest with you, the player comp that I would say probably most resembles would be Mike McGlinchey. Although I don't think Emil has the same frame as Mike McGlinchey. But if you remember when Mike McGlinchey committed to Notre Dame, he's like 240 pounds. And he wasn't a naturally big guy. But Mike always had like nice pop. He had nice punch. I think Emil is a little bit more athletic than Mike was at the time. I think Mike was bigger, I think, frame-wise than what Emil is. But as far as Notre Dame players, I'd say that's probably my closest comp. I think another guy that he reminds me of, and again, the frame's not quite as good, but it reminds me a little bit of the kid from Tampa Prep, Berkeley Prep, that Notre Dame would have landed if Harry Hiestand didn't leave. Nicholas Pettit-Frere, the kid that's at Ohio State now, he's got a little bit bigger frame than Emil, but similar talent level, similar length, similar body type, those type of things at the same age. So again, this is a risk commit, but it's a risk that the staff feels worth taking. I don't have any issue with that. I have no, like, I would have had a concern if they would have taken him in June because of who was still on the board. But now, based on where the board is, this is a smart take based on where the board is, based on the current roster, based on 2023. I think this is a smart take. Brandon Plender says, guy from 24/7 says his player comp is Austin Jackson. I think Austin Jackson's a fair size comp. Austin was a little bit bigger. I actually think Austin was more athletic, definitely more athletic. I think Emil's a little stronger. I don't love that comp as much. I think the Pettit-Frere one's a little bit better to me. He was a better prospect at the same age, but I think that's probably the closest comp that I could come up with. Here, I'm not gonna go there. I'm tired of that debate. It's just, I don't know where that myth about recruiting in Hiestand came from, but whatever. It is what it is. I'm trying to find some more. A lot of comments. Christopher Sally, this is a good observation, Christopher. Really good observation. Sorry if I already mentioned, but I saw Wagner is also a very good shot putter. I love O linemen who throw shot, lots of explosive power. Yes, it says a lot about the power that they have here, but it also says a lot about the power they have in their lower body too. You have to be good at both. And it's a really good observation, Christopher. Really good observation. Absolutely. I like that. Joe Pachuta says, do you believe we have met our ceiling with Brian Kelly? I don't think, not necessarily, because I think that there are moves Brian Kelly needs to make. that he's capable of making that could take this program to another level. I think the question is will he make those moves? That's a different question. But can they get there? Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's a good one. Brett Gallagher. If we could have a Manti Te'o like commitment on signing day, who would you pick? I'd go Anthony Lucas. And the reason I say Anthony Lucas is because Xavier Nwangwu was going to commit before then, so we'll already know his decision. That would be it. Because two reasons. Number one, timing. He's going to commit then. And number two, I mean, Manti was a game changer, right? He was a game changer recruit. He was, I mean, talking about gap closer, right? That was Manti. And I think Anthony Lucas is that kind of player as well. So if I could have anybody in this class that could be that guy, I would choose Anthony Lucas. There's no question about it. I don't think it's going to happen, but that's what I'm doing. Mike Gardner. What about Ronnie Stanley? Ronnie was always bigger. Ronnie was like 285. Ronnie always had big, broad shoulders. He had thick arms, thick legs. Ronnie was always a big kid. He was always a big kid. So no, I think now footwork wise, there's some similarities, but him and Ronnie Stanley don't have a whole lot in common, in my opinion, as prospects. And Jay Winky Jr., I'm so proud of myself right now. As you were asked about a comp, I said McGlinchey. I'm a 49er fan also, so he's pretty fresh in my mind, I guess. Very well done. Very well done. Bobby McCarthy, we're all thinking, all right? We believe he has the potential and tools to be really good, but can Coach Quinn develop him? That's the bigger question. I think that's very fair. I think that's very fair. Very fair. All right, and then we'll end with this from JP Buellsfeld, and I think it's a great way to end it. Happy Veterans Day to my father, U.S. Army Air Corps, World War II. I'm 100% sure he watches every moment of Irish Breakdown like I do from heaven. And I think that's a great way, JP, to end it. And thank you to all our veterans out there who have served this great country and sacrificed so much way people like me who never served can sit here and talk Notre Dame football in a free country and feel safe to do so. So thank you all so very much. Thank you, everybody, for kind of joining this impromptu show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, sign up for the Irish Breakdown message boards, and be with us tomorrow, 12:30. We'll start our Friday mailbag. We're gonna have an announcement about something fun we're gonna do next week. I'm looking forward to that. Should be a lot of fun. So anyway, look forward to y'all joining us then. Have a great rest of your day. Talk to you soon.